Now we move on to cattle, ranchers and homesteaders.
After the American Civil War of 1860 to 65, three things came together to bring about a boom in the cattle business on the plains. During the war, cattle in the South were allowed to breed uncontrolled, and there were millions of cheap, unwanted cattle. Texas Longhorns were a tough breed of cattle, able to live on the poor grass of the plains. Farming in the North had also been disrupted, and the expanding cities of the North needed meat. And by the 1860s, the railroads had reached into the plains, providing a means of shipping the meat to market. Cattle were brought to the plains from the south along cattle trails up to 1,500 kilometers long. The trails ended at railroad heads, where cattle were taken east on trains. The main cattle trails were the Sedalia Trail from Texas to Missouri, the Chisholm Trail, which by 1871 was bringing 600,000 head of cattle to Abilene, Kansas each year, the Western Trail to Dodge City, Kansas, and the Goodnight Loving Trail, striking out west towards the Rocky Mountains. This is a clip from footage filmed early this century. It is in fact one of the earliest documentaries. Cattle driving was hard, skilled work. Up to 20 cowboys looked after a herd, spending most of the day in the saddle and sleeping in the open. They had to contend with stampedes, bad weather, dust storms, and attacks from rustlers, Native Americans, and homesteaders. Most early cowboys were from Texas. They included black Americans and many Mexicans. By the 1870s, cattle ranches were being opened up all over the Great Plains. After all, why trail cattle from Texas when they could be farmed on ranches near the railheads? There were three main reasons why ranching was made possible. More railroads were being built. New, hardier breeds of cattle were able to withstand the harsh winters on the plains. And as the buffalo herds were destroyed, there were vast areas of land available. The cattle ranchers regarded the land as open, unused, and simply took it, even though it was often part of the Native American lands. They let the cattle wander at will over the open range, as they called it. Every spring and autumn they were rounded up by the cowboys. Cattle from different herds were separated, and the calves branded with the brand of the ranch that they belonged to. So much money could be made that people flocked to set up ranches, but by the late 1880s, the ranges became overcrowded, and the poor grass of the plains had become overgrazed. In 1886 and 1887, bad winters with terrible blizzards killed off thousands of cattle. Up to about 1870, the Great Plains were considered uninhabitable and unsuitable for farming. But then farmers, called homesteaders from the new houses or homesteads they had to build, began to settle and farm land in the West. There were several reasons for this. Land in the East was becoming overcrowded and expensive, so land-hungry pioneers drifted west. They included black ex-slaves, Germans, Norwegians and Swedes, as well as English-speaking whites. The US government wanted to attract settlers onto the plains. They passed the Homestead Act in 1862. This said that any male could have 160 acres of land free if he built a house on it and farmed the land for 5 years. Homesteading was a hard life. 160 acres was not really enough for a family to live on. There was a shortage of timber for building and fuel. There was a shortage of water, and digging wells was a back-breaking task. To help homesteaders, the government passed the Timber Culture Act in 1873, allowing farmers another 160 acres if a quarter of it was planted with trees. Machinery to drill deep wells and wind pumps to pump the water out of them began to solve the water problem. New strains of wheat, e.g. Turkey Red, produced better yields than wheat grown in the East. The invention of barbed wire by Joseph Glidden in 1874 provided a cheap, easy means of fencing, and new farm machinery helped bring large farms into cultivation. By 1895, farming on the plains was prospering. Once again, there's more source material on settlement in the West on the Bitesize History online site.
That's the end of the section on cattle, ranchers and homesteaders.